Bismillahirrahmanirrahim wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa alihi at-tahirin. We are continuing our history in brief lessons, and we're talking about Ulul Azm. Now, we were talking before we go into the topic for Ulul Azm, because I said Ulul Azm are Prophet Nuh, Prophet Ibrahim, Prophet Musa, Prophet Isa, and Prophet Muhammad. Alayhum assalam wa sallallahu alayhi. So we have to, before going into their tarikh, to their history, we want to talk about the very first man, because why? Our history concerns the occurrences and events and situations of humanity, of mankind. We know very little about previous creations. We know a little bit about the Nas who were on the earth before us, and they committed bloodshed and crimes, and they were destroyed. And we know a little bit about the jinn who are still around, but we can't enter we can't see them. We know a little bit about the angels, the malaika. So all these different creation we know a little bit about, but we don't know enough to have a comprehensive look or even a brief look at their vast history and their stories. But our history begins with Prophet Adam alayhi salam. Hence, we talked about the creation of Prophet Adam, and now we have to talk about the kind of interconnection or cross connection of the jinn and mankind. That is when one of the jinn, named Iblis, refused to obey the order of Allah the Exalted. Now, about this Iblis, he was a jinn, he was not an angel. In Surah Al-Kahf, I think it says that he was from the jinn. So the stories that are narrated and that our scholars tell us is that this Iblis was a jinn and he worshipped Allah for thousands and thousands of years, being very obedient to God. And he was even given the position of being able to sit amongst the angels and worship God from there. But he was not an angel. So Allah the Exalted put him to a test. وَإِذْ قُلْنَا لِمَلَائِكَةِ اسْجُدُوا لِآدَمَ فَسَجَدُوا إِلَّا إِبْلِيسَ أَبَى وَاسْتَكْبَرَ وَكَانَ مِنْ الْكَافِرِينَ. Surah 2, Surah Baqarah, Ayat 34. And when we said to the angels, وَإِذْ قُلْنَا لِمَلَائِكَةِ, this is the noon of supremacy. You know, in the Arabic language, we could use a noon for out of respect or exaltation. So the ruler, the king, can use the we, royal we. This is in, if you want to see about this, you can find this in Arabic grammar books, like Shar ibn Akil. So here we see Allah the Exalted is talking. And when we said to the angel, Isjudu li Adama, do sujud to Adam. You know, sujud is when you put your head to the ground. Do sujud to Adam. This is command. You all do sujud to Adam. Fasajadu illa Iblis. So they did sujud except Iblis. Aba wa astakbara wa kana min al-kafirin. He turned away, he refused, and he was arrogant. He turned away and refused and was arrogant, and he was from the disbelievers. First, what was the sujud? This sujud was a sujud out of obedience to Allah. Allah wasn't commanding him to worship Adam. It was a kind of respect. It was sujud towards Allah because you're obeying Allah's command. And there's some discussion in tafsir, you could look into it about this, but he's not worshiping Adam here. They're being told to do sujud to worship Allah out of obedience to Allah. Okay, first point. Second point is he was arrogant. He thought himself higher than he is. We have to be careful of this as well. Arrogance is a ruin to our souls. It will demolish your souls. Third point is kafir. What is a kafir? Technically, literally, the word comes from a kind of meaning of covering something, right? Covering the truth, something like this. So it makes sense because when somebody rejects something that Allah has sent, they become a disbeliever. Why? Because they have somehow covered the truth. They have somehow rejected the truth. That's why that it's possible on the day of judgment that many people, even amongst the Muslims, may be resurrected and put in the categories of the kafirs, of disbelievers. Why? Because they had things in front of them here that they rejected. That could be something simple, something that you see clear evidence for, and you reject it, like a Quranic ayat. But those people who don't know no better and they never arrived at this at the upgrade, they're not like that. Allah will reward them for what they do and will treat them on their ability on what level of knowledge they have. But those people who know the things and then they reject it, that's the problem. So kafir, so here Iblis is a disbeliever. He's a disbeliever because well, just it could be other things, but just think about it. He's rejecting the command of God. He's supposed to be obedient to God, but he's rejecting it. He's disobeying it. And that's where we have to as well reflect on us. We may say, okay, Iblis is like this, Iblis is like this. What about us? There's a hadith attributed to Ibn Abi Yafur that he came to Imam alayhi salam, and he said, Imam, if you tell me if you tell me to split this pomegranate in exact twos, and you say this half is haram and this half is halal, I will say this half is haram, this half is halal. Imam did mercy for him twice in this attributed hadith. This is how our mentality should be. No matter what it is, if we have the proof and the evidence for it, we must accept it. It doesn't matter what our personal opinion is, what our thoughts are about it that aren't aligned with that knowledge. It doesn't matter what our culture says. It doesn't matter what doubt we have. What matters is what the evidence says. What matters is what is actually from authentic Islam. So we cannot be rejectors of true Islam. Yes, we have to be seekers of true Islam, seekers of authentic Islam, as taught by Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, as is apparent in the Holy Quran. as we have to stick to this thakalain. Or else maybe we'll be resurrected amongst disbelievers. Maybe in the day of judgment we'll be put amongst disbelievers. Now, yes, in this world, we consider everyone who believes in the two testimonies, everyone who doesn't reject one of the essentials of Islam as amongst the Muslims. And we consider the Ahlul Kitab who just they're just trying their best. Maybe they haven't seen the upgrade. We consider them having a good potential. Ahlul Kitab, they may have a opportunity to get into paradise, and we may have an opportunity to get into paradise. Just because we are Muslims doesn't mean we're guaranteed paradise. We have to follow Islam correctly. We can't reject something. If also, it's just because they're Ahlul Kitab, just because they're Jewish or Christian, doesn't mean that they get paradise automatically either. They have to actually follow the truth. They have to follow to the best of their ability what's with them sincerely. And when you realize proper Islam and you realize the Islamic direction, well, we have to go there. And then when we realize the status of Ahlul Bayt in Islam, then we have to go there. Then when we realize what Ahlul Bayt actually taught, we have to go there. You see, through life, you have to be a knowledge seeker, seeking out that gem of truth. You cannot stop and say, I'm done here, knowing that there is something I'm rejecting. Allah judges us on our sincerity, on our knowledge, and what we do. And this is a point that maybe a lot of people don't understand. But yes, as long as we can see that we must search out the correct views. But if we reject something that we know is correct, that we see evidence for, then we are in trouble. And this Iblis has done. He knows that he should obey Allah. You don't worship Allah for thousands of years, not knowing that when God commands you to do something, you do it. Your whole thousands of years have been based on that. So let us not follow in footsteps of Iblis, and make sure we submit to what God has commanded. Okay. So there's a wider discussion, by the way. We have to have different discussions here, but lots of things here. Maybe there's some unclarity left, but you can feel free to message me and ask if something is unclear. Okay. So Iblis was commanded to prostrate towards Adam, and this prostration was to Allah the Exalted. وَقُلْنَا يَا آدَمُ أَسْكُنْ أَنْتَ وَزَوْجُكَ الْجَنَّةَ وَكُلَّ مِنْهَا رَغَدًا حَيْثُ شِئْتُمَا وَلَا تَقْرَبَا هَذِهِ الشَّجَرَةَ فَتَكُونَا مِنَ الظَّالِمِينَ. So here's that royal we again, right? وَقُلْنَا, and we said. Allah is narrating to us the history of mankind with immense lesson in it. وَقُلْنَا يَا آدَمُ, O Adam, أَسْكُنْ أَنْتَ وَزَوْجُكَ الْجَنَّةَ وَكُلَّ مِنْهَا رَغَدًا. Reside, you and your spouse in the garden, and eat from it, whichever you desire. حَيْثُ شِئْتُمَا وَلَا تَقْرَبَا هَذِهِ الشَّجَرَةَ. But don't And don't come near, don't you near this shajara. Shajara means tree, but it could also mean a bush. So there's some discussion in among Shia scholars and among Sunni scholars too, probably, and amongst Al-Kitabi scholars of what exactly this tree was, right? So that is another discussion. But one view is that um, it was a wheat tree that possible it was also a mixture of grapevine and it was maybe symbolic for uh I should say or not metaphorical but symbolic for something else. So there was a tree but it meant something else. Why? Because Adam ate from that tree because of some other reason. Like, well, if you eat from this tree, you'll become of the high ones. You'll this. So there was more motive behind eating from that tree, but that tree itself was a physical tree. Again, there's lots of discussion amongst Mufassirin, and when there's difference of opinion amongst Mufassirin, then it means that they don't have a solid view on it, right? When Imam Mahdi comes, he could answer and solve the riddle for us. But we do have some hadith. We do have a hadith, and that hadith suggests that there's multiple meanings to this tree. Anyways, when we said, "Oh Adam, dwell you and your wife in the garden and eat from it, whichever what you desire, and do not approach this tree. وَتَكُونَ مِنَ الظَّالِمِينَ." Then both you would you will both be from الظالمين. What is zalim? Dhum. Dhum we translate as oppression nowadays, right? Yes, that's one meaning of it. But dhum really it means not putting things in their proper place. Not putting things in their proper place. Hence, literally, justice, the opposite of it, is putting things in their proper place. So now that's a general term. So that can mean haram things, can mean good things, can mean bad things, could be everything needs to be in its proper place. And not putting them in their proper place is dhum. Depriving oneself of the ease is a kind of dhum, literally. So you see, literally, the word doesn't mean necessarily you would have sinned. Yes, somebody who sins commits dhulm, oppression to themselves, but it has a wider meaning, literally. Okay. So this is in Surah 2, Ayat 35. Now, is this garden Jannah? You see, يا آدم أسكن أنت وزوجك الجنة الجنة. This word Jannah is being used. And nowadays, when you hear the word Jannah, you probably think, Yani Jannah al-Khulud. Jannah al-Khulud. You're thinking eternal paradise, right? But no, again, the word has literal meaning. It means a kind of garden that's enclosed with thick greenery. Even the word jinn comes from similar root, right? And also the word for fetus. So technically then, the word literally is a garden. A garden. Is that garden the eternal garden after a day of resurrection, or is it an earthly garden? Is it a physical garden or a kind of barzakhi garden? Some seem to take many things in this story as symbolic. However, we must keep in mind that when we have a text and we doubt whether that text is metaphorical or literal, we fall back on a principle of taking the apparent meaning of the text. They call this the zahir of the text. We could look at any text and say, well, maybe it's metaphorical, maybe it's symbolic. But the point is, we have to assume the speaker is speaking literally unless we have a clue of context to divert our mind to a metaphorical usage. So over here, the ulama have different opinions about this. Some believe that the garden was maybe like a Barzaki garden. Some believe that it was a physical garden on the earth, earthly garden. And we'll talk a little more about this, inshallah. So we have this principle that we have to go with the apparent meaning. We're talking about a garden here. So we can't just drop the meaning of a garden, a tree. We can't say these things didn't exist. We cannot say that they didn't really eat from something. Why? Because we have the apparent meaning of the text. So we must keep in mind that the apparent meaning of the Quranic text is primary. Can there be more meanings to it? Batini meaning? Sure. But that apparent meaning still stays. And when we get taught in Hausa about tafsir, and we're taught about those esoteric meanings of Quranic verses and those exoteric meanings, the external apparent meaning and the internal spiritual meanings of the text, we are taught that we we cannot interpret Quran in a way those internal meanings, those exoteric meanings are conflicting, contradicting the apparent meaning. So they have to agree. So those inner layers of verses agree with still the external meaning. So the external meaning is still there. Now, can someone like Ahlul Bayt come and tell us that that external meaning is not there? Absolutely. Yes, absolutely they can. But we are not Ahlul Bayt. Nor is any of the Mufassirin. They are only scholars who are trying to understand the text. So, here, when we're working with this text, we have to work with the apparent meaning of the Quranic text. That is primary. Any inner meaning, any batini meaning must not contradict with that apparent meaning of the text. Unless we have actual dalil, evidence, like an authentic, reliable hadith that, mind you, we are convinced he's not doing tahwil, inner meaning himself. Because maybe the Imam is not conflicting the external meaning, he's just giving us an inner meaning, and we still have that outer meaning. We have to be sure that it is negating that outer meaning completely. Secondly, we have a number of narrations, a hadith, that describe this garden, that talk about this garden, that talk about this tree. and talk about it with physical characteristics. We also have the Holy Quran talking about them eating from this tree. So we have some kind of real, tangible garden happening here. It's not it's not symbolic, it's not fake, it's not just some kind of symbolic illustration here. It's not metaphor for something else. There is a real garden, but it could have meanings more than just the external creation of things. Like there was a reason why he ate from that tree. And that reason why stems to spiritual, moral qualities, things like that. It can. So that is the point. Rather than negating the external realities, I'm saying that we are keeping the apparent meaning, we are keeping the external realities, but saying there can be also more to it. There can also be internal meanings, patterny things. Okay. So the next question before we finish, because we're almost at the 30-minute mark, is what is this tree? What exactly is this tree that we're talking about? And like I said, shajara and Lugata Arabiya can be either an actual tree or it could be a bush. And we have a hadith which talk about it being a wheat and a vine tree, like grapevine. And you may find interesting that Jewish scholars, at least Talmudic ones, they have discussion about what this tree is as well. And some of them believed it was grapevine. And interestingly, some of those old scholars considered this related to, because it was grapevine, they related this to issues about wine, you know, because they believe becoming drunk is prohibited to them. Yeah. So, anyways, comparative religion. We're going to have comparative religion class, inshallah, next month. I think we'll start in September, inshallah, for free. You can email me to register for that. It'll be live, and it'll be online, and it's free. So over there, we could talk about and open the floor to these things a bit more. But let me go through this last slide about the shajara, about the tree. So the first thing we must understand and accept is that regardless of what the scriptural differences are, we are reading this tree served as a test. And I said there's a physical tree, but there's a meaning to it. And this tree is a test. Like that pomegranate I told you about, it would be a test. This tree is serving as a test. So, and such a test has consequences for the choice in which one took, the choice in which one takes in regards to what they do about this tree. Do they take the fruit from eat from it or do they not? More than this, such as the nature of this tree is additional to the main point. Like, was this tree wheat or grape or was it completely symbolic or something? This is like extra. This is like besides the point. The point is there was a tree and he was being tested. And the lesson that we get from this test, we can understand and take from this event. Now, story of Prophet Adam Islam is like a book. It's a practical book of revelation to teach us which way to go and what not to do. It's like an instruction manual that's taught to us practically. You may learn things two different ways, right? You may learn things by reading a book, taking lessons, or by practically experiencing that knowledge. If someone takes you and they teach you a trade, hands-on how to do it, you've learned that knowledge. And this may be an important point that we can point out here is the type of knowledge that is being taught to mankind from the beginning. Over here in this story is a practical type of knowledge. So, and we learn that way too. Just like we learn from study in other ways, we also learn from practical experience. Okay, so like I said, the word shajara in the Arabic language most commonly is translated as tree, but it can also be used for bush, and it can be used for pumpkin vine, and it can be used for wheat with ears. Now, there are various different views about the nature of this tree. First view says that it was a physical tree, and that tree was a wheat tree. So in this Jannah, this garden, it had some special tree, maybe special plants, special things. And this tree was a wheat tree. Here, the Mufassirin, the exegists, they seem to have differentiated between physical things like kafur. Kafur is not kafir. Kafur is camphor. They put in Vicks. Vine, grapevine, and wheat, etc. Second meaning that some say about this tree is that this is a spiritual tree. They say it was a spiritual tree, which would indicate jealousy. According to a narration, according to a narration that it indicates that this narration though doesn't indicate it's purely spiritual. It actually indicates that it was a wheat and maybe a grapevine, and there was a reason behind it. And that was based on a kind of immoral quality or maybe immoral intention or something like that. So to negate that physical part is problematic from that aspect of that narration. But saying there's more to it is very possible and maybe even confirmed if we take that narration. Now, some also seem to have thought that this was knowledge of good and evil in a metaphorical manner. In the Tafsir min Wahi al-Quran, the author states that there is no evidence upon this one in the documented way. So there's no evidence that it was knowledge of good and evil in a metaphorical sense in a documented way in our books. Third meaning that's given by some Mufassirin, and this is the view of Sheikh Makarim Shirazi, that is both metaphorical and physical. That this tree was both metaphorical and physical. That both metaphorical and physical meanings are possible. So according to the Ayatollah, it is possible that this tree is both physical and metaphorical, both of them. Hence, one may hold here a view that it was jealousy and a wheat tree as example. Regardless of the nature of the tree, though, it is not a bad. The tree is not bad itself. Rather, what was bad, what was not in its right place, was disobedience. And this we will come to a little later. Was called we consider some different views about it, but some of our scholars consider that it was tark al-awwal, leaving the better for the best, or leaving the best for the better. Like you have two good options, and one is the best, and one is the good, and you went to the good instead of taking the best. The best would have been to stay in that garden a bit longer and have all the comfort and not suffer all the difficulties of being out in the world where you have to toil and go through such grief and difficulties for what you want. So regardless, like I said, it's a practical lesson for us on how important obedience is. Results of disobedience cause us suffering, cause us pain, cause us difficulty. And this is a practical lesson for us, which is good in itself. At that, we will end. Inshallah, next lesson, we will talk about more about this. We'll talk about being sent in the earth or down to the earth, ihbit, in the next lesson. Wa akhir duwana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.